Gentlemen, welcome to the Be the Man podcast. I'm your host, Greg Denning. I am the creator and coach of the Be the Man Masterclass and Tribe, which is a brotherhood of awesome men who are committed to being the best version of themselves. Inside the Masterclass, we share the best tactics and tools and training that I've come across over the last 2.5 decades of research and study and working with thousands of men across 5 continents. Today, you are in for a treat, gentlemen. Our guest, Matt Beardreau, has so much experience in the world of education and youth, anywhere from public school to private school to Stanford University to creating and starting academies and now consulting. He is an expert in parenting and real education, and we dive into some seriously awesome topics, talking about how, where the problem starts and what are the major problems in society among youth and parents right now and education. We talk about how to instill and present responsibility inside of our homes and our families, how to correct when our kids get off target, because they will, and how to bring in inspiration and motivation. We talk about entrepreneurial ventures. We talk about what to read and where to start with education. We dive into very specific strategies and tactics we can start on right away to improve our own education and our own space where we're going in the direction of our lives, and how that plays in specifically and dramatically in our influence with our children and other youth and adults, for that matter, inside our circle of influence, and where the big problem lies and what you and I specifically can do about it. He is an expert in this whole field of academics and, just whole life education, and drawing that out from the inside and unlocking the potential of these amazing children and youth and students that we have, I think, is a very sacred privilege and responsibility to have an impact and make a difference in their lives. Anyways, you're going to love this. Such great content today. Jump in, enjoy this episode. Unfortunately, it's not often that I get to meet people who have a depth of experience in education and who are as passionate about education as I am. But today we have that treat, and I'm excited to dive into this and have this conversation. We've got a lot of crossover, a lot of similar paths. So super grateful to have you here with us, brother, and to have this conversation. So appreciate you being here.
Man. Absolutely honored. And you're right, man. A whole lot of crossover already just in these few minutes chatting. So
yeah. So let's start. Why don't you give us a little bit about you and your family, your background, and then we'll dive into some of the most relevant topics we could even discuss today in our environment and our situation.
Sure. Yeah, I'll give kind of the 30,000 foot overview. So, been in the education game for a long time. I say game very, very intentionally, because you learn early on that it is a game. But started out at Stanford, worked there for quite a bit. Naively went, okay, well, I'm going to start changing the game for young people in public schools. And I was a public school teacher, public school administrator, led to being a private school teacher, private school administrator. And all of that led to me leaving all of it to open schools. And I launched a few schools of my own, and I now help entrepreneurs launch these schools all over the world. But while I was doing that, it simultaneously launched a speaking career, which I wasn't necessarily looking for, but super grateful for. And I ended up talking to, Fortune 500s around the world. I've done about 700 keynotes over the past decade, traveling around the world, speaking to these organizations about what they wish they saw in young people, or they're going, yes, hey, we have all these young people working for us. They're really, really smart. And by the way, they suck. We want to fire all of them. Help us to unsuck them. And that only brought information back to take back to the schools, right? And so we could do some things at these schools. So I have a few schools that I've launched. I help entrepreneurs launch these all over the world. And then also have a mentorship program. A lot of people know who Tim Kennedy is. He's a good friend of mine, and he and I launched a mentorship program for young men, help families who want to home educate. Everything I do, every vertical I'm a part of, is all about building strong young humans. Period. End of story.
Fantastic, man.
Yes,
I love that. And I see, I've had that same privilege for over 2 decades, working directly with youth.
Yes,
and helping
sir.
them, maximize their potential and unlock what's already there. It's so beautiful. So
Hmm.
right out the gate, so I worked in public education as well and private education. And I think the vast majority of people who start down that path, they do have a dream and an ideal, and they want to make a difference.
You
But then
bet.
they get in, and there's so much bureaucracy, so much red tape, so many problems, and I think many of them just understandably kind of just acquiesce, be like, ugh, I had all these dreams of making changes, and there's not much I can do. What kept you from just settling and
Yeah.
acquiescing? What kept driving you to say, I'm not going to settle for this. I'm not going to accept this, and just keep pushing and even exiting to keep
Yeah.
chasing your dream?
That's a really good question, man. And I think you're right. And I always, I like to preface any of these conversations around the fact that I am such a fan of those human beings who are in this,
Yeah.
the good people,
Yep.
right? That are in the public schools, private schools, or whatever. Man, I'm a fan. I'm a supporter. I am here to be a resource, whatever I can do to help keep them going. Because it's exactly what you said. It's that bureaucracy, right? It's the systemic issues that we're facing. And so they either do one of two things. They either acquiesce or they leave.
Yep.
And I know I came from California, and it was somewhere around 50% of new teachers leave within first 3 years and never come back to the profession
Whoa.
because they want to come in there, and they are doing this altruistically.
Yeah.
They're wanting to make a change for these young heroes, right? They really do want to do that. For me, it was an unsettling in my soul, and the timing of it worked really well with having my own children too.
Yeah.
So, went in there with the altruistic endeavors and wanted to help young people, and had the blessing of being thrown trial by fire, man. And kind of like the ganglands of California. I was we're in a low socioeconomic area, Title I school, free breakfast, free lunch. But a lot of these young people were brilliant folks, but they were already involved in gangs, and
Yep.
families were very much involved in gangs. And I was connecting with, especially with these young men, and was fortunate enough to have a little bit of a rough history of myself and in my background that I could kind of connect there, right? And you kind of, yes, sir. So
Same.
could very much speak their language, and
Yeah.
so earned a lot of respect, earned a lot of respect, gave a lot of respect to them. And that, those are things they weren't used to, especially having respect
Exactly.
coming from other adults. And
Yep.
so was creating some phenomenal relationships and was really making some headway. But what I was making headway with was the relationship piece. It wasn't anything to do with the academia, right?
Yep.
And so I've got my site administrator saying, hey, this young man needs algebra. And I'm going, no, he needs to not be told to sell drugs when he gets home from mom and dad who have 209 tattooed across their neck.
Wow.
Right? Like that's, so I was what we called creatively insubordinate. And I continued to do what I thought was right versus what I was being told to do. And I got brought in by a superintendent who said, look, we've got a problem. You don't listen to the protocol. You aren't teaching to the standards. And that's an issue. The problem is
Makes me want to applaud you.
Well, and he did the
Break
same.
away.
He did the same because he goes, the problem is the other teachers love you. Your principal, even though you disobey and don't do the standards, she loves you. The students clearly love you. The teachers, the parents clearly love you. Like, this is an issue for us, right?
Yep.
And so I just kept wanting to take that next logical step, as naive as I was, going, here's how I'm going to shift things. So that's why I went into administration. But then I go into administration and you find out it's more about the bureaucracy. It's more about politics, money, power, right? And so I'm going, okay, well then private school's got to be the answer, because you don't have to answer to the state. So that's got same pig, different shade of lipstick kind of deal. And so it was just kind of that journey of trying to find out, how do I really impact them without anybody else telling me what to do?
Yep.
That's really it. It's my stubbornness of not liking other people telling me what to do that kept me going.
You're singing my song, brother. That is awesome. I love that. Okay, so let's just shift right there and then dive in. Then what is a true education? What is, in fact, I like to think about what is a world-class education, and we can dive into what that looks like for men and what that looks like for youth.
Yeah,
but it starts right there, and I can tell already just from things you're saying and what you're doing. It's like, it's more, academia is important, right? It's important to know things, but it's so much more than that.
Yeah, academia is important. It's important to know. It's important to know things, but what are the things that are important to know? And if you're talking from a purely academic sense, that ends up being a pretty short list.
Yeah.
And when you're looking at school, you're going, okay, well, what is the 1% of the 1% of the 1% of all there is to know in the world that we have to know? And you have to know it at a specific time. Otherwise, you're told that something's wrong with you or you're too, right? So it's, again, the reality of how important academia is in the real, it's very minuscule compared to all these other things. So it gets back to that question, right? And it's the question that one of my mentors asks. And he was really part of that push for me to Seth Godin.
Oh, yeah.
If anybody knows who Seth is,
Yep.
right? And so Seth was one of those, the big catalysts for me to finally just say, look, I've got to launch my own thing. But that's one of his prime questions in his manifesto that he wrote, Stop Stealing Dreams.
Which is fantastic, by the way. Everyone should read that.
Phenomenal. It's phenomenal. I read the entire thing in one sitting in the parking lot of a school that I was running, and went in the next day and said, hey, by the way, this is my last year here. I got to go open my own school.
Yeah.
So, he says, but poses that question, what should education be for? And I think at the root of it, I think that in of itself is a multi-hour conversation. But I think for me, at the root of that, it is sovereignty. It's those things that we were talking about,
Yep.
offline here before we jumped on. It's sovereignty. It is the ability to empower a human being to be fully sovereign in every way, to understand how to continue to grow, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, financially, all the ways that we want to continue. Education, right? Educate means to draw out. That's what it means. The root of the word means to draw out. You are drawing out what is inside you on this continuous path of moving forward, right? So that's what an education should be for. Who is this person right here? And how do we draw out the ideal amount of growth in all of those areas that it means to be human? That's what we're looking for. And so there's going to be a lot of overlap there. What it means, that humanity piece, there's going to be overlap there for Greg and Matt. There's going to be overlap, but there's also going to be some unique things in there. There are things that Greg is uniquely designed to do that I am not, and vice versa, right? And so education should be to release that humanity as well as that uniqueness so that we can go out and impact the world in whatever way we want. But sovereignty is the key.
It is. You're absolutely right. And I love the emphasis on the common denominators and then what makes us unique as individuals and pulling that out. So if we were going to, I love the idea as I study the lives of great performers and high achievers, they seem to have found things that work a little bit better than others. They try to find things that just optimize that. And so in this approach of drawing it out and cultivating and developing a whole human, what have you found in your experience that almost it's not a shortcut? There's no shortcut to education or development, but there's things that are magnifiers that just work faster and better, at least in my experience, that there's things that just draw that person upwards and forward in an amazing way, where it may take a long path over here, but there are certain things that'll get us there faster and better.
Yeah.
Have you found things like that in your experience? What works best in what you're describing there is that education of a human being?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm a big believer in experience over everything else, right? And I always try to tie that experience to every other thing that this person can tackle. So here's what I mean by that. There's this concept that I believe it was Plato had called the forms. And the whole concept was around identifying what an ideal looks like in any given venture. So what for you and I right now, what does the ideal husband look like? What does the ideal father look like? And those are things that we're in the midst of and we can relate to. So if you and I can go, okay, what is the ideal? What would the ideal dad do? How would he act? How would he think? How would he interact with his kids? How would he, if I can form that ideal and then I can give myself an experience in living in that ideal, right? I can start to move myself closer and closer to that. Will I ever reach perfection? No, of course I won't. But the standard should remain perfection. So if I keep moving towards that ideal, not only do I grow in this area, but I'm then able to see that same process and that of how that worked and go, okay, well, what else can I relate that to? So I go from maybe the dad to being the husband, right? And I see that work for young heroes too. Obviously, we don't talk about it that way. But if a young man, so going back to this young man who one of the first young students that I created a real relationship with, the gentleman that was being told to sell drugs, he's got the 209 tatted on parents' necks, and phenomenal soccer player. Like phenomenal, out of this world soccer player, all the potential in the world. And he did end up playing professionally, just kind of shortcutting to like the happy ending of that story. He ended up playing professionally in California, which is so rad. So phenomenal, right? So for him, he had that emotional connection to something, to an ideal, and his favorite players. And that's the first time I heard about Ronaldo and Messi and all these. I don't know about soccer. He was my first introduction to those guys, right? So I could take that ideal for him and go, okay, cool. What is it about them? And what do you want to do with your game, your soccer game? What are the experiences that you need to do or to have so that you can start to move yourself towards that level? And then we could take that same concept and go, okay, what would be the ideal, in this area that you're working on right here? How do we apply those same concepts, right? It's always an experiential thing. So I think dealing with ideals and dealing around experiences are what unlocks potential. I think it's much more multifaceted and nuanced than that, but I'm a big believer in experience over everything.
Amen, man. listening to you talk about, like, I've been teaching that for years. Like,
yes, you've been there. Yeah, you're in
experiences, get the mentors, hold up the icons and the heroes, and then make the relevant connections back to, okay, if this is where you want to go, bingo, what other areas of your life will poor decisions keep you from that? And then the relevance is so magical and so powerful for youth that when they say, oh man, well, yeah, this decision over here with this situation will keep me from this thing I want most in life.
That's
and
right.
When they see the connection,
that's right.
You don't have to tell them anymore. There's no lecture. It's like, man, I'm done. I'm done with that.
They're just in. And it's that heroic thinking that you're trying to build in, right? It's like, look, man, I don't want you to just gain Messi's skills. I want you to think like him. What would he do right now? What would he do? Would he go home and get on the porch and sell drugs? Or would he go home and grab a soccer ball and he start kicking it around, right? Like, it's that kind of connection that you're making for them, and it's the old, everybody makes fun of the whole WWJD bracelets that were very popular for a while, right? Like the what would Jesus do? But the reality is that's heroic thinking. Yep. You are making that. Napoleon Hill, in his Think and Grow Rich, he talked about building out a mastermind group and talked about building your board of directors and the whole and talking to them, and literally talking to them through every situation and decision. Through every situation, right? And that concept is so powerful. We can do it with our little kids. Our young heroes do that naturally anyways, right? I went upstairs earlier to grab some lunch and I could kind of hear a little bit of something, I was like, okay, what's going on? I turn around and my 6-year-old boy is sneaking up on me and he's dressed up like Deadpool and he's got a sword, right? Because for him, right there in that moment, he is Deadpool. Yeah. Period. End of story. Yep. He is him. Yep. Well, why don't we take that and let that continue? Because that's how we build our genius. Who do we want to become? And it doesn't mean that we're trying to be somebody else. It just means in different areas of our life, we connect with somebody who has done really well in that arena, and we're following the patterns of success, right? Exactly. We're just connecting that. And so then it helps drive our own behaviors. It's exactly what you're talking about, right? Yep. And for our young people too, and sorry, I just get so excited talking about this stuff, man. But for our young people too, they've got more distractions than you and I had growing up as well. So there's also now that added element of, kind of the addition by subtraction, like really making sure not just being focused on the heroic thinking and the heroic actions, but adding to your efficacy by stripping away the common distractions that are so prevalent for young people now. Exactly. Yeah, we legitimately are in the age of distraction. Yes, sir. And so not only do we have to proactively seek out adventure and experience
and an ideal, chase an ideal, but
Mhm.
we also have to eliminate the distractions and the roadblocks, which are keeping
Correct.
so many great men and so many great youth
Yes, sir.
away from their potential, from being the best version of themselves, because they're distracted.
That's right.
And it
That's
doesn't even
exactly.
have to be really that bad. It just has to get you to take your focus away. And like I always love to say, like where the head goes, the body follows, right? So all you got
Right.
to do is just take your focus off what you're after, and there you go.
That's
And
exactly
you
right.
miss your target.
That's exactly right. Yep. We're starting out, you and I start out walking on the same track, but if we're not walking parallel, perfectly parallel, if I go 1 degree to the right, eventually over time, that 1 degree, you and I end up in very, very,
Different
very
places.
different locations.
Exactly.
Right. And that's exactly what we're talking about with our young heroes, is keeping them on that track.
So let's jump into some real specifics,
Yes, sir.
things that really tangible things that we as men, husbands, fathers, businessmen, leaders can start
Mhm.
doing right away. And I
Yep.
would and I'm suspecting you're going to say there's some things we ought to be doing day in and day out, some habits and some patterns. But what are some things we can do right away to level up our own development and education, and then
Mm.
directly tied to that, how can we help with our children first, and then with any youth that might be in our circle of influence?
Yeah, see, you and I very much are aligned right there. And I love the way you framed that whole question, because you started with the understanding, not the presupposition, but the understanding that the best way, the first and foremost thing we need to do, the primary way to educate the young heroes in our influence, is to first make sure we're handling business ourselves. Right? That is it. I tell parents all the time, the best way to ensure your young heroes have a good education is to continuously improve your own, period, end of
Exactly.
story.
Yep.
That is the number one metric, right? They will do what you do before they do what you say.
All
So
day long.
yes, sir. So you better be leading by example, get your own stuff in order first. So that's the big part. For me, I think there's a few things. One, responsibilities, not distractions. So I think young people have been, we've devalued them societally, I think. And
Agreed.
if we start to come from this place of fear and this place of, oh, we're going to take care of you, and we want to bubble wrap. The word teenager didn't even exist until 1944. Didn't even exist. Wasn't even a concept. It was just, hey, congratulations, you're kind of a man now. Like take on some responsibilities, right? And so young people need responsibilities. They need them early and they need them often. And that's not taking away their childhood. No, you're providing them an amazing foundation because they're asking for it.
Yep.
Right? Parents know this. Hey, mom, can I help you cook dinner? Will that make dinner take longer to make? You bet it will.
Yes.
You need to go absolutely and start handing over some of those responsibilities.
Yep.
Absolutely, you do, because they want that, and it creates a different foundation. We sold some goats about a month ago here on the farm, and this guy drives up to get the goats. And my 9-year-old walks over and she's like, "Hi, I'm Brielle. Nice to meet you." And shakes his hand, and she says, "So, it's going to be X amount of dollars. I've got the bill of sale right here. So you're going to sign this. I'll just take a picture of this. I'll give you this one to keep. We'll keep the photo as our receipt, and then you can give me the cash here." And he was like, "What the hell is going on?" Right. But that's
Love it.
just normal for us,
Yep.
because that's part of her responsibilities.
Fantastic.
Right. So responsibilities. So that's chores, learning to set goals. You normalize being responsible. You normalize what you normalize. So if you normalize being responsible as just part of the status quo, that's what we do in this family. There you go. When your kids miss the mark, we're talking about practical things. Always say you're going to correct them calmly and you're going to praise them inspirationally.
Yep.
And I think those are huge. I'm talking about my 6-year-old boy earlier, and a great example. We were going out to the garden not too long ago, and he starts to walk through. He stops and he goes, whoop, opens it up and goes, "Ladies first," and lets my wife go and lets his 2 older sisters go. Right.
Fantastic.
So I want to grab those moments. I snatched him up, looked him in the eyes, and said, "Hey, I need you to listen to me right now."
That was awesome.
That's what a good man does.
Yep.
And you just did that because you are a good man. You're a good man right now. Very proud of you for doing that. Boom, set him down and go. I'm going to catch as many of those moments as I can and praise him inspirationally around those things. And when he misses the mark, because all the kids are going to miss the mark too, I need to not lose my stuff. It just needs to be calm, right? And we actually have a family contract that we have in place that allows us to just point back to tangible. Hey, we all agreed that this is kind of how we operate. You missed the mark on that, man. What do you have to do to fix it? Okay, cool. There you go. And the flip side of that is he gets to call me out if I mess up too.
Yep.
Right. He does it respectfully, but Dad, number 6 says no complaining, fix it. You kind of sound like you're complaining. What's the solution?
Yep.
Right. That's the power in that. Eliminating distractions, whether that's video games, all the screens and all that stuff, medication. I think the medications, man, people get upset at me about that one, but I think that one's a big one.
100% agree with you, brother. That we are way overprescribed here, and it's a huge problem.
It's huge. I promise you, your 5-year-old, especially your 5-year-old young boy, he does not have a speed deficiency. Nope. I promise. Right. Yeah. So, we got to get those out of there. Video games for me are the sneaky one, especially for boys.
So I take a hard stand on that one. Again, it's not real popular.
Yeah.
I just, in my decades of working with youth, I just haven't seen that be any beneficial, been beneficial at all at helping them become the hero of their own life story. And so I'm like, it's better off just to remove it.
Yeah. We just don't have them.
Yeah. Same.
I'm with you. We don't have them at all. Because I've worked, like you worked with so many young men. I've never seen it be beneficial. I've only seen it go the other way. Right.
Exactly.
Like we are, especially for young men. I mean, they're wired. Like we grew up, we're wired for wanting to achieve, for wanting to accomplish, for wanting to go conquer, for wanting an adventure, for wanting, that hero's journey. Like that is ingrained in us. It's in our DNA. We want that. And for you and I growing up, we actually had to win the game, or we had to go talk to the girl and maybe get rejected, right? We had to go, we had to actually do these things. And when you shift all that to the virtual, especially with these video games, these young men are able to check these boxes. Yeah. They check the boxes of I've accomplished something. Yep. I've conquered something. I got you talk about the pornography. I got the girl, yep. Right? I got all of these things are artificially being checked off. And then real life just pales in comparison. Cause why? I've got to work really hard on that.
Exactly. I have to actually go out and actually build something.
No, that doesn't sound so cool. It's so much easier to sit here and do this. And then I can talk to, so for me, man, getting rid of all that is a big deal, and then other practical things, obviously, but providing experiences, being intentional about what education looks like for our young people, and really pulling out of those conveyor belt programs if you can. And again, it's not.
Now, so we've done home education since we adopted our oldest. She's turning 20. We've done home education, but we call it world schooling because we took our family and went global. And I know you advocate that as well.
So right.
And my observation is, again, you and I both worked in public and private. My observation is it's needed now more than ever before.
Yes, sir.
I think pulling into that, figuring it out. And I would also say it's easier now than ever before because there's so many resources available.
Correct. Yeah, I've got, these are my conversations every day with families all over the world who are either taking the leap. They're like, okay, I'm scared, but here we go. Let's go. And so, we're helping them understand how to do that. Or they're reaching out going, I just don't feel like I can, or I'm a single parent, and we're going, it's still, there are so many resources. There's so many ways to do this. Let me help you figure out how. Yep. And so we've got a lot of single moms and single dads that are home educating now, and realizing that, it's possible and it's worth it, man.
Yeah.
It's worth it. Right. And it's not, people talk about the indoctrination that's going on in schools. True. People talk about, some of these agendas that are coming in and all this, all of that is true. That to me, again, you want to avoid those, but there's a sneakiness around the conveyor belt schooling it's kind of like the sneakiness of video games where you don't realize exactly what's being done. Exactly. The sneakiness around that conveyor belt, is that you are teaching that young human, to really play this game and develop habits in order to win a game that they no longer play once they leave it. Yep. So they spend, 12 years, 16 years, whatever it is, learning to play this game and then go in the quote unquote real world, and
It's irrelevant.
Nobody values that game anymore. The world doesn't value that game. Life doesn't value that game. And so then you're stuck going, wait a second, but I got straight A's, and the world goes, I don't care. Yep. And the new boss goes, I don't care. And the customer goes, I don't care. And that nobody cares. So now you're trying to unravel all of these mental habits that you've built for 16 years. Good luck.
Yep.
That is not an easy thing to let go of.
Yeah, those things are imprinted deeply.
They are imprinted deep. Yeah. So it's a sneaky thing, man.
I love that. Let's hit some specifics on, because I know a lot of men, and I know there's some women who listen too, but a lot of the people who are listening, they'll be interested in maybe some specific approaches to this kind of education you and I are talking about, this developmental whole person education. Let's try to give them some specific practices or philosophy, something to grab hold of, like what we can start working on this week as far as that kind of education. And again, whether it's in the home or at least, good parents that are sending their kids to school, they may still want to be deeply involved. I hope so, in their kids' education and in their experiences. So let's dive into that a little bit. What's worked in your experience?
So in my experience, the easiest thing for everybody to grab hold of and at least be able to impart, even if your young hero is going to still be going to a conveyor belt school or whatever that's still going to look like. And I call it conveyor belt school very, very intentionally. And that doesn't just mean the government schools. A lot of those private schools, again, look exactly the same. But if you're saying, hey, you're in this grade at this time, that's a conveyor belt school. It's the schools most of us went to. But some of the things to counteract that, the easiest thing to implement, and I argue that it is potentially the number one thing I would do if I could only do one thing to quote unquote educate my own kids, and I only had an hour a day, this is all you get. I would start with books, start with the classics, and dive into those heroes' journeys.
I was hoping that's what you were going to say.
It's my number one, man. Yeah. It's always my number one go-to. And in fact, the families that I help and the families that we have, kind of this tribe around, the first thing we do is we take a look at mom and dad and how are you guys leading by example? But two, we take a look at schedules. What do schedules really look like? This is why we've had so many single parents that have finally been able to go like, okay, I can do this. Mm-hmm. So you take a look at schedules and go, how much time do you actually have with your hero that you're going to be able to pour into this? And then we prioritize. If you've only got 1 hour, we're going to prioritize reading the classics and having great conversations around that, putting your young person in the shoes of that hero and having great conversations around that. How does that apply? What would you have done? Making parallels to things that are going on today, thinking through that, not going, me as parent, I'm going to beat the answer into you, having a conversation, asking them why, allowing them to ask why.
And they'll come up with the best answers.
You better believe they will. And that is number one. And hey, by the way, it's free. Maybe you don't have all those books in your house, but there are these things called libraries that we have forgotten about.
They still exist.
They still exist, man. Go get some of those classics and you read them together and have those conversations together. That's number one.
Absolutely. I got to jump in here real quick. When you'll appreciate this. When we started traveling when our kids were little. We had 4 kids. When our 4th was born, they were all still little. We started traveling, and we traveled all over the world for years. And we packed 300 to 400 pounds of books with us all over the place. And people were like, why don't you get, ebooks? And I'm like, not the same. Doesn't count. Nope. And we do a lot of audiobooks now, but we packed books with us everywhere so we could read and have those conversations. And it is a total game changer.
It's a game changer, man. That's it. Because again, what is education for? We're trying to draw out. There's no better way to draw out than inspiring the person to want to be the best possible version of themselves. Yep. So you paint those ideals with all of these other heroes in these stories, and these heroes are facing struggles that your kids are going to face. And so they can go back to that and go, oh, well, what did Pip do then? Right? Or what, like they go back to that and go, okay, and I've really fleshed out my ideas of how I want to act, how I want to behave, how I want to respond in these various situations. So that's by far, number one, if that's all the time you've got.
And it's worth pointing out right there that that's where even the fictional, right? Some people might look at fictional books and be like, oh, what's the real value of this story? And I'm like, well, if it's a classic, if the hero is living a model life, I promise you and your children will attach to those very lessons. Bingo. And they'll grab hold of those and they'll make it applicable. It happened today. My son, so we have this completely transparent relationship around devices, because as you get older, you are going to be exposed to inappropriate things. And it's going to come up. And so I with my older boys, it's not like, hey, have you seen it? It's when was the last time you saw something? And I want this transparency. So he sent me a message today. He's like, oh man, I just accidentally saw something totally inappropriate on here. Just wanted to let you know, shut it down, got rid of it. And I jumped into the book I'm working on. Yeah. And he happens to be in this fictional book. It's called The Walking Drum by Louis L'Amour. It's one of my all-time favorites.
So good, man.
And Kerbershard's in there. And he's just this stellar young man who's making the most of himself. And my son writes back, he's like, yes, this is who I want to be. He wrote back, he said, I want to be a gentleman Viking. Right. And I was like, yeah. Yes. He's like, what? He's like, what happened to all these youth that are sitting around doing all these stupid things today? He's like, why aren't we chasing greatness? Right. And so this very thing you and I are talking about happened today.
That's so rad. Good. First of all, good job to you. Good on you and your wife, honestly, leading that. And again, you talk about somebody that, saying you don't meet somebody that's as passionate about you as education. And I can say the same thing about fatherhood, right? And about leading intentionally in our homes and not leading, reactively, which is arguably not leading at all, right? That's the way to go for you. Like that makes me excited about who, even more excited about who you and your wife are. I think that's phenomenal, man. And that's it. I got that gentleman Viking. We talked to our young men about being the savage gentleman, right? Same concept. Yep. Having, all the capabilities of having under control and living your life as a gentleman, but being fully capable of doing what you've got to do. Like that's exactly it. Exactly. And you're talking about reconnecting to those heroes. One of the questions you asked me towards the beginning was kind of like, what made me take that step to continue on in education and go build things, right? I read that book, right? I read Seth's book, and it wasn't like I hadn't thought about doing this prior to, and Seth just gave me this. It was kind of this catalyst, but the reality was I was looking at my board of directors too. And in my board of directors, that I use, that I talk to, that I go, okay, speak into my life. There are some fictional characters in there. And William Wallace is in there and has been since I was 14. Right?
Yes.
I remember being a 14-year-old watching, and when he said, obviously there's a lot of fiction in the Braveheart movie. I get it, man. But the point is, that whole concept of every man dies, not every man really lives, that struck me even at 14. And I just went, well, what am I even chasing greatness if I don't even give this a shot to try to build something better for my own kids? Like, I can't look myself in the mirror if I'm not willing to even give it a shot, right? And then I'll tell you who else is in there too, is Tyler Durden, right? And say what you will about the Fight Club movie. The Fight Club book for me was transformational. And having the concept of this guy who truly had released all of the need or desire to please somebody else and do something. And now he did some things that were a little rough, obviously, but that need to go, I don't need to impress another human being and chase after all this stuff that is nonsense. Why don't I chase after real change? Why don't I chase after a legacy? Why don't I chase after something that is true to my soul and not this, garbage? Like those were two of the big things for me, man, in launching these schools. Heroic thinking matters. It's number one, far and away.
Yep. And your story is a perfect example, because those characters get in our mind and they build this scaffolding. Then when we come to a crossroad, the mind goes back to, well, what do I know about this? Who do I know who's made similar decisions? What should I do? What does greatness look like? And we'll lean on characters and say, well, no, this is the higher path.
That's right. And the more you build your network, the more you build into that scaffolding. Rule number 2 in our house is to be a copycat. And that's exactly what we're talking about. Copying the patterns of greatness. And so we can get that from fictional characters. We can get that from biographies and autobiographies. We get it from the people around us, right? And the more we build our network and have these great folks, we can continue to look towards, now I've got other guys that speak into my life too. And I go, okay, well, what would Beardreau have said about, like, would this happen here? What would Beardreau have done on that? Because I value what he he would have said in this entrepreneurial venture, or whatever that looks like. So yeah, man, far and away, that's number one for me.
Love this. Oh, I love this. Let's move to specific activities, experiences.
Mhm.
What has worked best in your
Yeah.
world?
A lot of so this is where I think there's a lot more flexibility. I think you've got to know your hero. There's, again, kind of educate to draw out. You got the things that overlap, right? The experiences that kind of overlap, and then you've got the experiences that draw out the unique. So I've always been big, the schools that I've had, as well as my own kids, entrepreneurial ventures.
Yes.
For me, are something that really overlap the entire experience and allow for massive growth really, really quickly. Right. It's a big thing to have that young person figure out, a product or a service or something they want to launch, and go through the process of, how do I let people know about it? How do I talk to them about it? How do I persuade them to buy it? How do I get seed money to start anyways? What does that look like from a financial standpoint, right? You talk about all these, emotional, physical, spiritual, financial. A lot of those boxes get checked in entrepreneurship. So we had, we always launched business fairs at the schools that I have. Our last business fair, man, we had 2,000 people ish show up in 3 hours for these young heroes. 3 hour period, over 2,000 people show up. I had young heroes walk away with $5,000 on a Saturday.
Nice.
In 3 hours, right? I always tell people, like, we have horses. Why do we have horses? Well, my daughters, who are now 11 and 9 at the time of you and I talking, when they were 9 and 7, they bought horses with the money they had made from their businesses.
Fantastic.
Like, that's, it's not just the practical experience there, but gosh, talk about confidence, right? When you can,
they grow so much,
so fast. So, I think taking on those entrepreneurial ventures, even if that's just running a little lemonade stand or a bakery, or getting yourself, you can be entrepreneurial in a number of different ways. We give young heroes, you ever seen the TED Talk around the paperclip flip, where the guy flipped a paperclip all the way up to a house?
No, I didn't see that one.
Phenomenal story. And I won't, the guy basically starts with a paperclip and he flips it, meaning,
he trades it, the exchange. Yeah.
Just trade. He's just trading for something of greater value, and he's being intentional, right? Because he's like, hey, to me, this thing right here is no big deal, but Greg collects these. So if I can get this, I can go give this to Greg, and Greg will give me a freaking TV, and then I'll take a TV, right? So even that is an entrepreneurial venture, and flipping your way up. So we've got, I put this, so the TED Talk, the gentleman flips away from a paperclip all the way up to a house is kind of which is just nuts. It's really cool to listen to his story. But we have taken that challenge, and I've done it in my schools. I've done it in my mentorship program. I've got a young mentee who got his very first truck, never spent a dime on it, started with a paperclip.
Yes.
I took heroes out to the mall and just went, all right, man, you guys have, you guys have 3 hours. Here's paperclip. Let's see what you come back with. Let's see. And we had people come back with dresses and neon signs. I had somebody come back with a perfectly functioning cell phone within 3 hours at a shopping mall, talking to strangers, starting with a paperclip. Right. So I think those kind of, that's, and by the way, Gary Vee saw that, and he sent us a bunch of shoes for our initial high school class. Sent him a bunch of Gary Vee 03s. He's like, here, go flip these too. So some of them end up flipping those and making all kinds of cash. So I think those kind of things are kind of the all encompassing for all people. But taking a look at who your hero is and auditing that young person too, the experiences look different. So I've got, I've got a daughter who's into gymnastics, and she's into gymnastics and dance. I got another one that's in dance and horses. So she's not just riding horses, but she's, taking care of obviously the horses that we have, but she's also working at a local stable and volunteering out there. And then my young man, into like Ninja Warrior course and jujitsu. And so those kind of experiences too still are educational in a lot of ways, not just in obviously not in an academic sense, but in a self-awareness and self-discovery sense of the word.
Yes. So, man, I couldn't agree more. My kids. So we had set, well, I want to go, I'm always out doing big things. So this kind of a setup, I love big adventures. And so we're like, hey, I'm going to go climb Kilimanjaro. And so instead of paying for my teenagers to come with me, was like, hey, do you guys want to join me? And we'll do climb Kilimanjaro and then we'll do a safari. And they're like, yes. And I'm like, hey, you gotta earn your own way.
Bingo.
And they're like, yeah, we're in, we'll do it.
Yep.
And so they all went out this summer, and man, they earned thousands and thousands of dollars. And the money is insignificant to what they gained from the experience. So it's spot on with what you're saying there. And they grew so much in confidence and skill and ability and thinking and interaction with humanity and like how to articulate and communicate. It was so powerful. So it's that same line of progress, and just another witness to what you're talking about. It's incredible. Let's get our kids chasing some kind of goal that excites them, and get them through that work to become who they need to become to get the next level and to be their own heroes.
So if I've got to hire a young person for any position, and I've got a young person that talks to me about the fact that, well, we had this family goal, we were going to go climb Kilimanjaro. So here's what I did to make sure we could make it happen. I saw this goal, I wanted to do it. So then I figured out a way to make that happen. If I've got that, or I've got somebody that went, yep, you bet, I was so obedient. I got straight A's all through school. I even got straight A's through college. That seems like a silly comparison, and it's not even, it's silly when you say it out loud. It's like, what, that's not even a comparison. Right. And that's what we're talking about. That's real education. I love that, man. So cool,
too, brother. So fun. Man, I love this. I love what you're doing, and who you are and what you're doing, and the difference you're making. Let's shift gears here for a second. What do you think are the biggest problems men and families are facing, and maybe youth? Like what's the big ugly monster, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, so we said men, families, and youth, and I think we're talking families. I mean, realistically, statistically, the fatherless homes is a giant issue. That's obviously an issue, but even I take it a step further. There's a lot of fathers who are physically present, but they're not present.
Yes.
Right. And I think that is just as much as the fatherless home issue is an issue. I think that's an issue as well. We've got a lot of dads who are distracted. We've got a lot of dads who are not, not pushing towards greatness. They've acquiesced. They've relinquished their sovereignty. They're living in a reactionary way. They're following whatever the status quo is, and they're allowing themselves to become a caricature of what manhood really
exactly. I refer to that as leveling off instead of leveling up.
That's exactly it, man.
Go right over.
That's exactly it. And culture it's the onus is on the man himself. He needs to be personally responsible for that. But culture has contributed to that by talking, all the toxic masculinity, no such thing. Masculinity is a set of honorable virtues, period. And the story talks about them, right? If you have a male who is toxic, then he's a toxic male, but it's not because he's masculine. It's because he's the opposite of it. So, all the conversation around toxic masculinity is garbage, and the caricatures that we hold up, the Homer Simpson model, the Peter Griffin model, the the dad bod kind of model of where it's kind of funny to be this goofball that isn't very wise, isn't very educated, isn't very driven, isn't leading, isn't physically fit, isn't all of those things that are just literally saying it's cool to be the opposite of those ideals that we talked about earlier.
Exactly. You're just taking your whole idea and just slamming it right down in or below mediocrity and saying, hey, let's celebrate this.
Let's celebrate that. And you get a bunch of clowns doing that together. And that's a big problem, man, because then all of that pours right into our youth, right? They're seeing that, and they're seeing that that's what's celebrated. So it's not even attractive for a young person to be an adult anymore, because adults look like fools half the time.
Exactly.
So it's not attractive anymore. Again, talking about that hero mentality. Well, they're not looking, young man should be able to look up to his dad and go, that is that hero archetype. I should see that right there. And they can't, they don't see that. And they don't even see it from enough men in society, period. So I think we have all of those things, not to mention, obviously, the conveyor belt schooling, the fear-based parenting, where it's like, you can't even go outside anymore because somebody's going to call CPS because, children are clearly going to get kidnapped if they go outside. We've taken away, free play from our young those. And
I got to jump in here because I saw that very thing yesterday. It disturbed me. We went out to a soccer practice. My daughter wants to get into soccer. We were out there, and there was a storm way in the distance.
Yeah.
I mean, it was there was no threat. And I'm like, that's so far away. Like, I don't even think it'll come this direction. Yeah. And there was a little flash of lightning. And this man comes running over, a big guy, big, huge man. He was so afraid. Clear the field, get everyone off, get him away. And he was just trembling. Like, no, we're canceling practice. And I'm like, what's going on?
Yes.
And the irony just struck me. This big guy, he was a lot bigger than I was. This big guy. And he's just so afraid. Yep. And he wants everyone off. And he's just, you can tell his fear is just directing his decisions and his thinking. And so everyone kind of clears the field, and we just watch in the distance, watch the storm blow past over there. And then they're like, okay, come back out. And we lost a good 20, 30 minutes of practice, and they almost cancel it. But I was like, hey, whoa, it's in the distance. Let's see if it even comes this way. Never even came close to us. But this guy was just, you could tell him he was just trembling with fear. And it's that fear kind of parenting where I get it. If there's real threats, great. But if we're imagining threats and keeping our kids from experiencing life, man, we're crippling them.
And that's almost always what it is, statistically speaking, right? It's this anxious parenting where it's fear about fear. It's being afraid of the things that aren't real. And it's being afraid of the imaginary and being afraid of the potentially the what if, we're operating from that place as a society. And so we've got a bunch of kids that are afraid. They're anxious. They're not. So not only are they not going towards an ideal, they're afraid to do anything. They're massively distracted. Right? We've got and they're medicated. And then we want to pretend like there's a mental health problem that is something that can be caught like a flu. Right?
Exactly.
Like, man, you can't, if we're not willing to take a look at each one of these, and physical activity for these young people too, by the way, if you're not willing to take a look at all of these things, we can't pretend like we care about their mental health. We don't. Yeah, that's it. And then the physical part of that is a huge deal too. I posted something the other day, man, on I don't know if you've seen the documentary, The Motivation Factor, but it talks about La Sierra High School in the 1960s, and JFK had come out and said, like, this should be our national physical education program, what this school is doing. And this whole documentary on these guys and these young men. You watch this documentary and they were a bunch of freaking studs. Like every one of them, in this physical fitness program at this high school was just shredded, and they're out doing calisthenics and they're doing all this work on these obstacle courses. And it was phenomenal. And they're only doing 10 or 15 minutes. The PE wasn't focused on playing freaking badminton, pickleball or whatever. Like, it was physical fitness first, like actual fitness. But every single one of these guys was super happy. They were super engaged. They were helping each other. They were just, and they go, they're talking to all these guys now years later, and they're like, that was the biggest gift I was ever given in my life. Like, it just meant so much, right? And there was no participation trophies. The guys were competing to get different color shorts based on what you could do. And they weren't like, oh, you suck because you got a yellow shorts. No, it's like they were all, pushing each other and motivating each other. Mental health wasn't an issue for these guys. Not at all.
Nor was obesity. And what's interesting is when you do this right, young men love that. They love sweating and pushing and burning and challenging themselves. They thrive in that stuff where it's so messed up and rested, W-R-E-S-T. It's so twisted and distorted now. We have these young men like, I don't want to. Oh, it's terrible. I'd have to sweat. It's hot. It's cold. It's uncomfortable.
And the parents will write a note, and the parents will write a note for it too.
Yeah, and they'll get them out of it.
Honey, you shouldn't have to, because if you went out there because you're a little bit overweight, and some of the other boys will do something that he can't do, and it just makes him feel bad, right? And like, that's the way and that's again a fear-based parenting, right? It's everybody needs the trophy because otherwise I'm afraid my kid's feelings will get hurt. And that's a microcosm for how they look at almost everything else, and it is damaging the kiddos.
Whoa, man, I love this stuff. Love this conversation, brother. Let's wrap it up with two things. Number one, your most important piece of advice for men, just something that's working for you, or something you've seen, your vast experience, just one piece of advice for men, and then one specific thing we could start on today. And I know I'm putting you on the spot here, so give you a minute to think about it, but a piece of advice for men, and then something like we could take away, start right now today. In fact, what you said earlier about the classics, I couldn't emphasize enough. Like, if nothing else, grab a book and keep reading. I mean, I have 7 kids. My wife, we have multiple businesses, multiple properties. I got tons going on. I still average a book a week and have for over 2 decades. So there's just no excuse. We just have to keep reading and learning. But that's one good piece. But what do you say, brother? One piece of advice, one specific action step we can start on right away.
Yeah. So if we're talking for men in general, I think one thing that gets kind of glossed over in our, yes, we got to be physically active. Yes, we got to be, we got to lead, we got to date our wives. We got to lead our kids intentionally. We got to do, like, all of those things I think are absolutely true. But I think one of the things that sometimes gets glossed over is you need to make sure you've got a band of brothers. Right. That are gonna keep you leveling up too. And I don't mean in the, there's kind of this fluffed up sense of, okay, we're all going to get together and we're going to look into each other's eyes and we're going to say, Greg, you're okay just the way you are, right? We don't work that way.
Exactly.
That's not us, dude.
Yes.
That's not how we respond, right? Men don't operate looking at each other, and that's how women operate. And that's great. That's a beautiful thing. That's not how we operate. We'll look each other in the eyes and go, hey, dude, suck it up. And then what happens is I turn my shoulder like this, and you and I are shoulder to shoulder now as we go to conquer something else, right? So you need a band of brothers that are going to be aligned on that, where you guys can truly hold yourselves. Accountability is another kind of like a buzzword, but the reality is, I've got a handful of men where I can go, hey, dude, do you need help on this? And then they can say, do you need help on this? And if I see them make a mistake, they see me make a mistake, we can be like, hey, you need to get your stuff together.
Exactly.
So, if one thing for men, I think, get a good solid band of brothers. It's the whole, you're the 5 people you spend the most time with kind of, it's true. The reality is it's true. And so then, as far as a takeaway, like I said, I think the classics, I don't think there's anything more, depending on who we're talking about needing the takeaway. But I think, if we're talking about it from a parental standpoint, I think understanding that other mentors matter for your young heroes too. I think the parents need to understand, as they're raising their own young heroes, they're the primary inner voice for that young person, right? Like, they're number one for a long while. So their inner voice, everybody's got that inner voice, that we go to, the inner conversations we have. Well, it starts out as the parents for those young heroes, but as those young heroes get older and they get more exposed to the world, right? And we're talking about building that board of directors, other people are speaking into their life, whether you want them to or not. So maybe be intentional about who gets to speak into their life.
Yes.
Right. And that's one of the whole problems around, like, the socialization argument around school is you want to tell me for 90% of the day, you want other inexperienced 12-year-olds who may or may not have a good thing going on at home. You want them to be the primary people building your 12-year-old's inner voice?
Exactly.
I
don't. Way.
I don't. I want to be very intentional about that. So yeah, I still want to be able to be part of that. But at 12, they're also seeking other people. So I'm going to bring in those hero stories so that they speak into it. I'm going to bring in good men from my life to speak into my son too, because, Ray Care might say something to my boy that, I've said a million times, but because Ray's a Navy SEAL and CIA spy, okay, cool, I'm going to go ahead and take it. But great, man, cool, have at it. I don't care. I'm just looking for the end result, right? I'm going to bring these mentors in. So mentors matter. They matter for us as adults, and having that brotherhood, but they matter for the young heroes too.
Absolutely. Spot on, my friend. On both counts. That's so awesome. Wow. Such great stuff, man. I love like having this conversation. I'm like, yeah, you are speaking my language, man. We have shared a similar life experience and a similar message. This is so awesome. It's so great to have you sharing this with the world, and really sounds like you've dedicated a major part of your life to doing this. So kudos to you and honor, my friend. How can people connect with you, reach out with you, tap into the resources you have?
Thanks, man. I appreciate it greatly. I'm most active as far as social media on Instagram, just at my name at Matt Beardreau. But Matt at Apogee Strong, APOGEE strong.com. People can reach out to me directly, whether it's around what does it look like to start a school, mentorship program, educating from home, parenting. We have plenty of resources and a great network in that. So anybody I can help, reach out to me any of those ways, man. Glad to help.
Love it. Fantastic, brother. Thank you so much again for being on the show, for being
Honor.
who you are, and for doing what you do.
Thanks, brother.
Fellas, thanks for making the time and effort to listen to this podcast. Education matters so much, as you just heard. This stuff cannot be emphasized enough. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast, reach out and connect with Matt and support his work. If you're willing, reach out and leave a review up to 5 stars, and leave a note and share this with friends, family, colleagues. Let's get this message and this mission out to other men and to leaders and teachers, so we can really help unlock the potential in our awesome youth. Fellas, if you are ready to level up your life, jump into, I have a 7-day Be the Family Man challenge, which outlines 7 essential things that every man needs to be the man in his own family. And you can jump into that. It's inexpensive, great challenge, great place to start. And if you're really ready to go for it, join the Be the Man Masterclass and Tribe. Get in this band of brothers, get the mentoring in there, get access to the tools and the tactics, the strategies, the principles and practices that just work to help us become the very best version of ourselves. Everything physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, socially, financially, so that we can show up both in the workplace, in the business world, the marketplace, and at home. And we can be leaders in our community and be our best selves and really live, gentlemen, really live and be alive and squeeze the juice out of life, so to speak, as our best selves, so that we feel awake, energized, and alive, and can create a lifestyle that is just absolutely phenomenal and help make a huge positive difference in the world. Love you, fellas. Be the man.